I was living what they call the Bahamian dream. I had a wife, I had a mortgage, I had a brand new baby, and I had this really good bank job. And I remember they say all entrepreneurs have that aha moment, like, especially if you were working a 9 to 5. Everybody experiences that moment where they're like, aha, I can do this on my own, or I should leave, or I should, it's that moment where they realize that entrepreneurship is their path. And for me, that happened. I was at the bank. I'll never forget. We needed something like 20 million regionally for the bank that I was working at. We were in a liquidity crunch. So that was right before the 2008 financial crisis. And I'll never forget, I was a loan officer at the bank, and our branch had a target of something like $500,000 in term deposits that we needed to get in. The country, the Bahamas, I think, had a target of something like less than 10 million. And so I remember I can't even remember how I got this guy's number, but one of the wealthiest families in the Bahamas, I got in contact with their patriarch. And I remember going to his office and we were talking, and I convinced him to move $1.7 million in one shot from his existing bank to my bank. And I just remember like the feeling that, wow, like this was done. So keep in mind that our branch target was 500,000. I brought in $1.7 million one shot. And it felt so good. And I remember going back into the branch, and the next day after I closed the deal and the funds were transferred, branch manager, at our regular morning meeting said, and we want to recognize Ethan. Ethan has single-handedly more than tripled what our branch target is in term deposits. And he did it all in a matter of a week and a half. And we are literally the leading bank in the campaign right now. And he had this envelope. And I remember he said, Ethan, on behalf of the bank, we want to show you our love and appreciation. And he gave me this envelope. And I ran to my cubicle and opened that envelope. And it was a $25 meal voucher. $25 meal voucher. And I just remember feeling so deflated. But it was in that moment that it was aha. Now, the thing is that about a year or two before that, I had a conversation with who we dubbed the golden boy at the bank. And I remember I was on my way to London and I stopped by him because he was somebody that I looked up to. I wasn't even in credit at the time. And I asked him, and I just remember going into his office literally on my way to the airport. And he was upset. And I said, why are you upset? He's like, man, I already brought in over $900,000 for the bank. This isn't even the end of the first quarter. And I told them that I want an assistant to help me with the paperwork so that I can be more effective. And they told me no. So he was so upset that he said, because if I was an independent broker, my commission on that $900,000 would have been $90,000 right now. And that's really where the seed was planted. And so in that moment, when I saw that $25 meal voucher, I just thought about that. I said, wow, this would have been $170,000 if I was an independent broker. That's when the decision was made that I was leaving. And then it took me maybe about a year before I actually left because I was setting things up. But that was the moment that I decided that I was going to be an entrepreneur. Upon leaving the bank, my first business, or my business, was actually a mortgage brokerage. And if I'm being 100% honest, it wasn't my desire or even my intention to be the world's best mortgage broker. The reality is that I chose that industry not because I was passionate about it, but because I was really good at it. And it was something that I was doing for the bank. And so it was the easiest thing for me to transition into. And, being in that business, I actually started building my client base in the business like legit 3 months before I left. So I actually had my office that was walking distance from the bank where I worked. And so on my lunch hour, I would actually go and work in my business and then walk back to lunch. But when I left and I started working in the business full time, nobody knew who I was. Mortgage brokerage was a relatively new industry in the Bahamas because there were only maybe about two other firms, full-fledged firms dedicated to mortgage brokerage. And so there was a whole lot of education. But literally, what I did was, and this is how long ago this was, I would call fax companies. So I would get the yellow pages, get their fax number, and fax flyers all day. And then I'll also cold call other people. So when I thought about who else services the clients that would need mortgages, well, when you think about attorneys, you think about real estate agents, you think about developers. And so literally I would cold call all of these different individuals in these different industries, let them know who I am, what I do, how I can help. And it was just through sheer brute force that I pushed through to six figures. Like literally, I worked all day, every day, 7 days a week because there was really no option. And there were some rough times. And if I'm being honest, it took me for the first maybe almost 2 years in that business, I was making no money. Like I would be hard pressed to make $250 a week. But it's just continuously coming up with ways to generate revenue. And so I actually was the one who introduced the paid model of mortgage brokerage. At the time, none of the other firms were actually charging for the service of mortgage brokerage. And I just remembered I really needed some money. The light was about to get turned off. And somebody had called and they said, hey, I heard about you and I want you to fill my application. And they said, how much is it? And they told me how much is it. I told them how much I owed on my light bill, which was $350. So I said, $350. And so they said, okay. And I was like, what? Is that easy? You just charge. And at this time I was doing maybe about 10 to 15 applications a week. But the model that I entered the market in was where I would only get paid once the mortgage was closed, which could be months. And so when I realized that, customers, because I was providing a value add service, that they would actually pay me to do the application, then that just became standard. And so now I was charging everybody $350. And I did get some backlash because I would hear, oh, well, that other firm isn't charging. And I would just say, well, that's good on them, but we charge because we know the value of the service that we provide. And literally that's where my business started to turn around. And so I created, out of necessity, a new revenue stream for my business. And it literally transformed how I operated, not just that business, but that lesson has carried me throughout the other businesses that I've worked in as well. When I decided to start my first business, of course, I had people doubting me. Like, I remember the biggest two that comes to mind is my mom, who was like, boy, you crazy. You can leave that good bank job to go talk about you opening a business. Because at this time, entrepreneurship wasn't as trending as it is now. And then my then mother-in-law, who actually called a family council. So I was sitting down there with my then wife, my ex-wife, her sister, her brother-in-law, her mom, and then two aunts. And I had to explain to them and try to convince them as to why I was okay opening this business. And it was, at the time, it was very humiliating as a grown man having to try and justify why I was opening this business. Not even my family, my ex-wife's family, but a lot of them didn't think I was going to make it. And they were right for the first about almost 2 years because I wasn't making it, but I stuck with it. And eventually things turned around. And then it was like now, my son got mortgage brokerage in Nassau, and it was these things. But I can say that, I didn't really listen to them because I still went through with it. But just knowing that your family didn't think that you could do it really did weigh on me. But then I realized that had more to do with them and nothing to do with me. And like I said one time ago, I always used to get beaten for my bright ideas in any event. So I was kind of used to it, but it still didn't make it feel any better. So this was just another bright idea that I had that I'm glad that I made, because almost 20 years later, it's still paying off. So if you're feeling stuck in your 9 to 5 and you're considering opening your business, I would say just get clarity. One of the things that I didn't do was just leave immediately. Like I said, I took it was about a year before I made the decision to leave and actually leaving. And that year was spent doing research, getting clarity, really setting myself up for the best possible position. And so sometimes we tend to move based on how we feel. So because we aren't happy where we are, we just pick up and go. But if you are feeling stuck and you're seriously contemplating entrepreneurship or business ownership, I would say just take time to plan your exit, set yourself up as much as possible. And then what you do is you find comfort in knowing that you are setting yourself up for greater successes outside of that. And then something else that was really instrumental for me when I was moving from my 9 to 5 into my business, my thought process on what I was doing changed. And so I looked for things to learn, and I looked at how they were operating their business as a global bank and some of the things that I can take back to make my business. So I became a student in my position as opposed to just an employee. And I can tell you that made a world of difference as well. And so if you are feeling stuck and you do want to move, make sure you're clear on what it is that you want to do and where you want to go. I would also say find comfort in knowing that you do have an exit strategy and you're working towards that end. And then while you're still on your 9 to 5, look for things that you can learn, that you can implement into your business venture when you leave. You don't have to stay stuck. The first step is deciding that you're done settling. Start where you are with what you have, but move. Your next level is not going to find you. You got to go out there and build it. So until next time, I'm EQ. Get uncomfortable, do the work, because the world needs your greatness. Peace.